Now, I've stated multiple times on this channel that Shadow of the Colossus is one of my favorite video games of all time. That being said, it is also one of the very few video games that still terrifies me. Shadow of the Colossus is a horror game, and I'm here right now to explain to you why. Let's get into it. So starting off, if you're like me, you have what is called megalophobia, which means fear of big objects to a certain extent. I don't know the entire dictionary definition of it, but that's basically the gist of it. So right off the bat, all the enemies you fight in the game are massive colossi. They're giants. There's these giant stone animal hybrid creature monsters. And that's just it. And pretty much to scale, this Chucky doll right here is the first boss. You might be about this tall compared to him. So by default, that automatically scares me. For about as long as I can remember, I've actually been really scared of things bigger than me, which is partially why museums terrify me, but that's another video for another time. Second off, what really freaks me out about Shadow of the Colossus, you're in what's called the Forbidden Lands, and the story, you got to go out there, kill these 16 colossi to bring this girl back to life named Mono. We don't know if it's your wife, girlfriend, sister, cousin, best friend. It's never explained. That's beside the point. But what is the point of this is that in this Forbidden Lands, there is no life whatsoever. It's all trees, desert, mountains, water. No animals, besides a few birds and some fish in the lakes, but maybe you'll find a turtle if you're playing the HD remake. But aside from that, it gives you that sense of feeling alone, which is also freaky to me. I mean, just this massive open world. Picture this. You're in your room late at night. The only light in the house is the TV playing Shadow of the Colossus. You're in between colossi, and so you're just out wandering looking for the next boss. And the game is dead silent. I mean, you can hear the galloping of Aggro's feet. You can hear whistling from Wander if you're calling Aggro. And maybe the beam of light from your sword if you're trying to find the colossi. But that's the only audio there is. It's dead silent in this massive open world. It makes you feel like there's something watching you. That's the best way I can describe that. It gives you this sense of paranoia. Because why would you be alone in this massive world? There has to be something else here, right? There's too much ground to cover for there to be nothing. But simple as that. There is just nothing. It gives you a sense of dread and loneliness in this really dull, dead world. And the only time music ever comes on is either in cutscenes or when you're fighting the boss. But aside from that, just the sense of being alone is also terrifying. Just think about this. Stranded, middle of nowhere, no one around, no one to keep you company. Sounds like a horror game to me. Another thing I want to touch on is there might be minor spoilers in this video, by the way, so if you haven't beat Shadow of the Colossus, probably stop the video at this point, go play Shadow of the Colossus, then come back. But when you die in the game, if you die normally, the death screen just says game over, and you get the little patch. It shows the patch that's on Wander's little poncho vest thing he wears. I don't know exactly what it's called, but not too bad. But if you die fighting a Colossus, you get a very disturbing, up-close and personal look at the face of the Colossus that just killed you. I remember the first time I was getting this game. When I first got this game, I invited one of my friends over who had told me about Shadow of the Colossus. In fact, if you actually go back to my favorite memory video from a little over a year ago, then I explained the story of how I got introduced to this game. But I get the game, I invite him over, and he came to stay the night at my house. And like I just said, in the sense of loneliness, we're alone in this room, the only light being the TV, and the only audio coming from the game. You can hear every little creak and crack in the house as it settles. I'm getting nervous thinking about it. So we're trying to marathon run this game. So we are taking turns back and forth, like, all right, I'll get this Colossus, you get the next one, and so forth, and it keeps going. And then, like, we had died a few times, and we said, yeah, we see the death faces, we're like, yes, this is kind of creepy, not really a big fan of that. Until we get to Dirge. I believe Dirge is the 9th Colossus, maybe 10th. I can't remember the exact order. But if you play this game, you know. So here's my history with the Dirge boss fight. He had got to this point in the game. It was his turn to take the next boss. And it's the middle of the night, and I actually ended up nodding off asleep. And I remember barely seeing him make it there to fight the boss itself. And then I kind of dozed off. Then all I hear is, oh. And I open my eyes in this pitch black room and look at the TV, and I see this right here. This is pure nightmare fuel. I mean, they made it way more tame in the remake, but we're talking about the original here. Tell me this face right here staring at you in the middle of the night when you're all alone is not nightmare fuel. Getting into a little bit more spoiler territory here, every time you defeat a Colossus in the game, you get these tentacles that come from the bosses. They attack you, and you wake up at the Shrine of Worship. But from the time of being attacked and the time of being woken up, you get this essentially a loading screen, but it's also a cutscene of this white void just coming at you. And the more you progress through the game, you start really quietly hearing these subtle whispers from Mono, the girl you're trying to bring back to life. And it starts off with just like little whimpers, and then you might get a word here or there, and then you get even more phrases, but you can't really make out what they're saying. So again, being alone, watching this black void, you're invested in the game, and you start hearing this creepy voice just talking to you out of nowhere. It's also disturbing. Also, that being said, about halfway through the game, once you finally start hearing Mono's voice a little bit, you get this cutscene, and it shows from Wander's point of view. He's waking up in the shrine, and the camera is really staticky looking. It looks almost like the flashbacks from Kingdom Hearts 2 in the prologue, but maybe not to that extent. But it's got like a really static filter over it, and you're staring at Mono just laying there dead, and then suddenly the camera flashes, and she sits up, and she slowly turns to look at you, and she's dressed like the girl from The Ring too, so that doesn't help any either. But again, it's terrifying. But those are my main points of why I believe Shadow of the Colossus is a horror game. It may not be advertised as one. It's more of a fantasy, adventure, drama, whatever you want to call it. In fact, the guy who made this also made Ico, or Eco, however you say it, and The Last Guardian. So if you played either of those, you kind of get an idea of how this game's going to go. But this one is way more terrifying than either of those could be, and way more terrifying than most horror games I've played. But this one right here, mostly for the Dirge face alone, but Dirge, well, just the death faces in general, this massive open world, the feeling of loneliness, the constant feeling you're being watched, not good. And also the megalophobia aspect of it. Like, you get this really triumphant music as you're getting to defeat the Colossi, but the reveals of them, once you realize how big they actually are and how little you are compared to pretty much everything in this world. Now, this doesn't scare everybody, I will say that. But personally, I'm terrified of big things and that feeling of loneliness and deep water. So there's a couple deep water boss fights in there too that don't sit good with me, but I've rambled a lot. But Shadow of the Colossus is a horror game. Always has been, always will be. And that's just that. But on that note, I think I've rambled enough. I hope I got my point across. I know I've pretty much just repeated myself a lot, but this is a video I've wanted to make for a while, and I wanted to have a reason to revisit one of my favorite video games ever made. But that's going to do it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and as always, rock on.